They were the children left alone. No global positioning systems, no cell phones, no tracking apps. For millions of people born between 1965 and 1980, childhood was defined by a single physical object, a house key tied around the neck with a piece of string. They were the latchkey kids. While the world today focuses on the anxiety of Generation Z or the burnout of millennials, there is one group that remains remarkably silent. Generation X, the invisible middle child of history. Psychologists have found that growing up unsupervised didn't just make them independent, it literally rewired their brains for a level of resilience that is almost impossible to replicate in the modern world. They survived the Cold War, the rise of the internet, and multiple global economic crashes, and they did it all without a public scoreboard of likes and followers. Today, we decode the Gen X paradox. We are diving into the neuroscience of why this forgotten generation might actually be the toughest group of humans to ever walk the earth. Welcome to Mind Secrets! To understand why Generation X never breaks, we have to look at the unique biological window in which they were raised. In developmental psychology, there is a concept called free-range growth. Unlike children today, whose every minute is scheduled and monitored, Gen X was the last generation to experience true, unsupervised play. Research shows that when a child is left to navigate the world without an adult constantly hovering, their prefrontal cortex develops a highly sophisticated internal navigation system. For a Gen X child, a problem on the street was a problem they had to solve themselves. If they fell off their bike, there was no one to call. They had to get up, brush off the dirt, and find their way home. This repeated exposure to small, manageable risks created a neural foundation of self-reliance. While modern generations often freeze when a task instruction isn't detailed enough, a Gen X brain simply figures it out. This is not just a personality trait, it is a cognitive adaptation born from necessity. Let us dive deeper into the psychology of the latchkey home. Imagine a 10-year-old child arriving home at 3 p.m. to an empty house. They had to unlock the door, prepare their own food, and manage their own time until 6 or 7 in the evening. In modern clinical psychology, this might be viewed with concern, but for Gen X, it was a masterclass in executive function. They learned to prioritize tasks, manage loneliness, and create their own entertainment without a digital screen to provide constant dopamine. This formed what neuroscientists call high cognitive endurance. They don't need external stimulation every 10 seconds to stay focused. They are the masters of the long game. The second pillar of their resilience is what sociologists call the analog childhood and the digital adulthood. Gen X is the only generation that truly bridges two civilizations. They remember the weight of a physical encyclopedia and the silence of a house before the internet arrived. But they were also the ones who built the digital world we live in today. This dual citizenship gives them a rare psychological advantage: perspective. Because they remember a world without the internet, they are less susceptible to the digital dopamine loops that trap younger generations. They know that life exists outside the screen. When a social media platform crashes or a digital trend fades, Gen X doesn't panic. Their identity was formed in the real world, among real people, through real friction. They have what psychologists call a high internal locus of control. They believe that they are the masters of their own fate, regardless of what the algorithms say. Let us perform a small psychological test right now. If you remember the exact smell of a library card catalog, or the sound of a rotary phone dialing, or the feeling of being completely unreachable for 8 hours straight while playing outside, write the word independent in the comments. This simple act of remembering activates the long-term neural pathways associated with your formative years, and it helps us see how many representatives of this resilient generation are with us today. Another critical factor in the Gen X makeup is their relationship with failure. In the 1970s and 80s, failure was private and local. If you made a mistake at school or wore an embarrassing outfit, it stayed in that moment. There was no permanent digital record. No one took a screenshot. No one turned your growing pains into a viral meme. This created a sense of psychological safety that is rare today. It allowed Gen X to take risks and fail without the fear of global judgment. This history of private failure built a thick skin. Today, when a Gen X employee or entrepreneur faces a setback, they don't see it as a permanent stain on their identity. They see it as a temporary problem to be solved. They are the masters of the pivot. While other generations might spiral into a crisis of self-worth after a public critique, Gen X simply sighs, drinks their coffee, and gets back to work. This is the superpower of being the forgotten generation. When no one is watching you, you learn to live for yourself. We must also consider the role of boredom in the development of the Gen X brain. In the 80s, there were only a few channels on television. If it was raining outside and nothing was on, you were bored. But in psychology, boredom is the gateway to creativity. Gen X had to invent worlds, build complex structures out of cardboard boxes, and read books from cover to cover because there was no infinite scroll to save them from their own thoughts. This ability to be alone with one's mind created a deep level of self-awareness. They don't fear silence. In fact, many Gen Xers find peace in the very moments that make younger generations anxious. Their brain knows how to generate its own stimulation. We must also discuss the economic hardening of this generation. Gen X entered the workforce during a series of brutal shifts. They were the first generation to be told that they might not do as well as their parents. They saw the end of the lifelong corporate career and the birth of the gig economy. They were the original pioneers of the side hustle, not because it was trendy, but because it was a survival requirement. This formed a specific economic psychology. Gen X is the generation of Plan B, Plan C, and Plan D. Their emergency fund isn't just a bank account. It is a biological response to a world they never fully trusted. This healthy cynicism is actually a protective layer. It prevents them from falling for over-optimistic bubbles and keeps them grounded when things fall apart. They are the best crisis managers because they spent their entire lives expecting the unexpected. Let us look at their cultural defense mechanism, irony. The music and movies of the Gen X youth were saturated with a specific kind of dark humor and skepticism. From the raw honesty of grunge music to the dry wit of cult classic films, Gen X learned to use irony as a psychological shield. It allowed them to process the absurdity of the Cold War and the threat of nuclear shadow without losing their minds. Today, this translates into a high level of mental flexibility. They don't take themselves too seriously, and they are less prone to the emotional extremes of modern social media outrage. They have a built-in filter that asks, is this real or is this just noise? One of the most fascinating aspects of Gen X resilience is their role as the great translators. In modern companies, they sit in the middle. They understand the hierarchy and traditional work ethic of the boomers, but they also empathize with the desire for flexibility and purpose in Gen Z. They are the semantic bridge between two vastly different eras. This requires a high level of emotional labor and social intelligence. They know how to speak the language of a formal boardroom and the language of a casual Slack channel. This adaptability is a key marker of high intelligence. By constantly navigating between these two worlds, Gen X has developed a cognitive flexibility that younger generations struggle to achieve. They are the mediators who keep modern organizations from collapsing under the weight of generational friction. Now let us examine the Gen X relationship with privacy. Growing up in an era before cameras were everywhere created a deep respect for personal boundaries. They understand that not everything needs to be shared. In psychological terms, they have a strong sense of the private self versus the public self. This distinction is vital for long-term mental health. Because they don't depend on external validation from strangers on the internet, their self-esteem is much more stable. They don't need 1,000 likes to feel significant. They know who they are because they spent decades figuring it out in the quiet spaces of the real world. But what about the shadow side? Psychologists note that the independence of Gen X often masks a deep-seated hyper-independence. Because they had to solve everything themselves as children, they often struggle to ask for help as adults. They carry the world on their shoulders, often to the point of exhaustion, because their brain is wired to believe that if they don't do it, no one will. This is the Latchkey legacy. If you find yourself unable to delegate tasks, or if you feel a strange guilt when someone tries to help you, you are experiencing the psychological imprint of those empty afternoons. This is the price of being the toughest generation. You learn to be a fortress, but even fortresses need maintenance. We also see this in their parenting styles. Gen X parents are often a walking paradox. They want to give their children the freedom they had, but they are also acutely aware of the dangers of the modern world. They are the ones trying to find the balance between climbing trees and managing screen time. They are the most protective generation because they know exactly what can go wrong when no one is watching. Yet they also struggle with the urge to step back and let their children fail, knowing that failure was the very thing that made them strong. As we look toward the future, the role of Gen X becomes even more critical. In an era of deepfakes, artificial intelligence, and digital noise, their groundedness is an anchor. They are the ones who can teach the next generation how to be human in a world of machines. They are the living archives of analog wisdom. They know how to read a map without a satellite. They know how to have a conversation without a notification. They know how to be alone without being lonely. This ability to endure boredom and turn it into creativity is a rare cognitive gift. While the world moves faster and faster, the Gen X ability to slow down and focus is becoming a high-value skill. The concept of resilience is often misunderstood. It is not about never feeling pain or never being afraid. It is about the speed of recovery. Because Gen X was exposed to reality in its rawest form from a young age, their recovery time is remarkably fast. They have a psychological toolkit that includes dark humor, extreme self-reliance, and a deep skepticism of authority. This toolkit was built in the 1980s, but it is exactly what is needed for the 1920s and beyond. Let us discuss the concept of grit. In psychology, grit is defined as passion and perseverance for long-term goals. Generation X is the personification of grit. They don't expect instant results because they grew up in a world where you had to wait a week for the next episode of a show or a month for a letter to arrive. This patience has translated into a rare form of cognitive stamina. They can stay with a difficult problem longer than almost anyone else. They don't quit when the first obstacle appears. They simply adjust their strategy and keep moving. Ultimately, being part of Generation X means carrying the code of two worlds. You are the last generation of the old world and the first pioneers of the new one. You did not just survive this transition, you were forged by it. Your resilience is not an accident. It is the result of a unique historical experiment that will never be repeated. You are the very definition of the mental toughness. You are the generation that can fix a broken engine, navigate a complex software update, and handle a global crisis all before lunch. Remember this strength the next time the world around you feels chaotic. You have already survived the end of one world, and you are more than ready to lead us through the next one. You are Gen X, and your silence is not a sign of weakness. It is the quiet confidence of someone who knows they can handle whatever comes next. You don't need the spotlight because you learned how to shine in the dark. Your paradox is your greatest advantage. You are the seam that holds the history of humanity together. As we already know, it is in the space between eras that the strongest personalities are born. And you are the ultimate proof of that. You are the unbreakable middle child. You are the keepers of the silence and the masters of the noise. You are Generation X. Thank you for watching Mind Secrets. If this exploration of the Gen X mind resonated with you, share it with a friend who also remembers the weight of that key around their neck. Let us know in the comments, what is the one thing from your analog childhood that you wish the world had more of today? Your insights help us build a deeper understanding of the human experience. Don't forget to subscribe as we continue to decode the hidden mysteries of the human mind and the psychological forces that shape our world. We will see you in the next video.